Hi everyone. Oh, I am glowing. That's exciting. Okay. I'll try to ignore the glow. Let's see if I shift a little bit. No. Okay. We're getting a glowing face today. Okay. So, we are going to do our 7th class of the positivity bias. Let's see if there we go. Now I'm not glowing. I'm glowing less. Welcome. So, class number 7. Let us begin. Today's class is called Setback or Spring Forward. And we're going to be talking about a very pertinent concept. Deals with when we've experienced a setback, is how to see that in a positive light. That's our goal here, is to figure out how we're seeing everything through this positivity bias. So, there is a concept in Chassidut called Yerida L'tzarech Aliyah, which literally means a descent for the sake of an ascent. Obviously, this is like a profoundly paradoxical concept. We're dealing with a descent, but we're not focusing on the descent, but we're focusing on the fact that it is for the sake of an ascent. There's a story with the Rebbe, that an individual came to the Rebbe, and he was a young man. He had actually just started learning in a yeshiva. One second. Okay, I'll leave that. He had just started learning in yeshiva. He hadn't grown up with Judaism he wasn't active in his Yiddishkeit. He didn't know anything about it. And this yeshiva experience was the beginning of his Jewish journey. And just as he had started this journey towards knowing more about his Judaism, he had been enlisted in the army. And he came to the Rebbe feeling really down about this. He felt like he had just started on this path, and now he was nervous what would happen at this point, because he really just started, and the army wasn't exactly a great environment for developing your Judaism. And the Rebbe said to him that sometimes you just need to take a step back to take a step forward. And the boy wasn't quite sure how to understand this, but the Rebbe stood up, and he stood right in front of his chair, and he said, "I can't jump over my chair from this distance. I'm too close to it. But if I take a few steps back and I take a running start, I'll be able to jump over my chair." So the young man didn't quite understand this, but then he enlisted. He went to the army, and what he experienced there was he went from being like a self-invested, someone who was going to spend time learning about their Judaism, to someone who became a leader in their Judaism. Not only did going to the army not detract from his becoming closer to his Judaism, but it actually enabled him to become a leader, to help others come closer to their Judaism. It strengthened him. So what he thought was going to be a descent, not only was it not a descent, it enabled a great ascent in his Judaism. So that's the concept of Yerida L'tzarech Aliyah in general. And we're going to kind of explore how sometimes we experience a descent, and we're not able to see how the descent itself enables an ascent, but our goal here is to see the positive aspect of that, or at least to see the ascent that was the effect that resulted from that descent. So it's an exercise of zooming out. Sometimes we're just seeing the ascent as a very specific occurrence in our lives, but if we zoom out, we're able to see the larger picture, where that descent enabled us to become stronger in a relationship. We know often when we experience challenges, we just gain so many more techniques and tools that enable us in times that are better, where we don't feel the ascent, to just up our game so much more. So in Judaism, we're gonna like take this to the extreme because we know that we as a nation have been in exile for over 2,000 years. So to test this theory of Yerida L'Tzarech Aliyah, that this descent is for an ascent, we have to apply it to the most extreme cases. So are we able to apply it to exile, which seems to be the most disastrous experience in our collective history, is that we were sent out of our land of Israel. Our temple was destroyed. We're dispersed all over the world. We no longer have our nation state. We no longer have our temple. So we're saying that is our descent, and we're seeing if we apply this rule of a descent for an ascent, which we're using our positivity bias, if we're able to see how such a calamity could be for something positive. And it is discussed that, or the Rebbe discussed, that how the exile was something positive is because of what it has enabled. And what has it enabled? We are spread out in all four corners of the globe, and we have been able to spread the light of Torah, which is not what, when we talk about exile, we always talk about it as almost like a punishment, a consequence of past actions, which it is. But when we look at it through this light of ascent, a descent for ascent, and based on our premise that we've mentioned before, that God is essentially good, which means that every action that happens, every experience we have is essentially good, comes from an essentially good place, is for an essentially good reason, then exile itself, even though we describe it as a punishment or a consequence, it is for the good. So exile has enabled us to go all over the world and to bring light and goodness to all four corners of the world, which is exactly what it would be for. So it's a necessary step that enables an ascent. Now, we can take it a step farther, or we can look a little deeper when we say that exile was a result of our past actions, was a consequence. We're talking about the fact that there was sin, that we messed up. But also through this lens, we're understanding sin to mean to have to also be essentially good. So can we use sin as a descent, as a way of ascending? Like maybe we should be purposefully sinning to get us to this ascent, like this springboard, or pulling that rubber band back so you can get farther. Should we be using sin to get to higher places based on this rule we've just introduced? So no, we shouldn't be using sin in that way. But the fact is that sin has to be a necessary step if it is a part of the process that God has put in place, and God is essentially good, right? That's our premise. Then sin also, which seems to be the opposite of, or is the opposite of God's will, somehow also fits into that process of ascending, of getting to a better place. And if it is the process, it is the only way to get to a higher point, if that is what Hashem, if that's what God has put into place. So it's like that rubber band. You've pulled back just in order so that you might go further. And I'm going to finish off by sharing a really beautiful thing that the Rebbe shared. The year was 1977. So before I share the story, this is really, like, we keep going a little deeper. This is like, we've spoken about descent or distance, or how all of these furtherings bring us closer somehow. This is talking about the void, the absence of, and how that can be a positive. So in 1977, the Rebbe suffered a serious heart attack during Shmini Atzeret, which is one of the most joyous holidays in the Jewish calendar. And while the doctor was drawing blood from the Rebbe, while he was treating him, the Rebbe asked him, what is it that draws blood from the vein? Is it the needle, or is it the vacuum of the syringe? Now, the answer is it's the vacuum. So the Rebbe shared that It reminded him of a gentleman that came to see him once, and he complained that he felt empty inside and unfit for anything. And the Rebbe says that I told him, in fact, the opposite was true. An empty vessel can draw in with much greater intensity than a vessel that is full. So he's actually full of potential. The Rebbe then applied this concept to the situation. It was the general sadness that was happening during this holiday because the Rebbe wasn't able to attend the celebrations. So the Rebbe said that since I won't be able to speak on account of my health, um, he asked his secretary to repeat this teaching of the vacuum and to say that though his chair will be empty, there was a vacuum there waiting to be filled with joy. Um, so this void, that we see as a negative, as something, as a lacking, really through a positivity bias, we need to see it as just space to be filled, potential energy. So we have descents that we experience. We need to understand that post fact, they're for the sake of an ascent. We feel distant sometimes, but that distance should only forces us to feel like we need to draw closer. So it enables us to draw closer. Sometimes though we feel empty, and that void feels like a total lack of. That doesn't feel like there's any good there, but that's the point. There isn't anything there. It's all potential energy. So I'm gonna wish you all Chaim, and that anytime you experience one of these negative or seemingly negative emotions or experiences, or if you're experiencing a bit of a void right now, know that it's all just potential, and you have potential energy for so much good. And it is Friday, so I'm going to wish you all a very beautiful Shabbos. It should be a Shabbos of healing for you as an individual, for your families, for the world globally. And we should get back together Sunday and share good news. So, l'chaim to you all, and good Shabbos. We will see you on Sunday.